And so I think we took a, like, I don't know if scorched earth is the right term here, but we took a, like, okay, let's just
You
erase.
burned it down and
Yeah, let's
rebuilt it.
burn it down and rebuild. Exactly. We will be the phoenix rising.
Welcome to Creative Leadership with Heart, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of creative leadership. I'm your host, Rico Nasol. Join me as we explore the transformative impact of heart-centered leadership in today's creative and design organizations. All right, welcome back all to Creative Leadership with Heart. Today, my guest, Shira Katz. She is the head of content strategy at Coursera. She's a user-centered leader and strategist in the learning media and technology spaces. How are you today, Shira?
I'm great, Rico. It's so
Yeah,
nice to
thanks.
be on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining me. It's been a long time. We haven't talked in a while, but it was good to catch up before hitting record.
It
Um,
absolutely was. Yeah. I love to
yeah.
hear about family, work, high expenses in the Bay Area and the lower expenses in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's interested in listening to that, then maybe we can have a different conversation for them.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, just get into it. So, can you tell us a little bit about you? You told me a little bit about your aspirations as a child, and we'd love to get into that. But what brought you to your journey into content, into strategy, into technology, and just giving a little bit of people a little bit of context on who you are?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'll say who I am first, and I'll say kind of what brought me here. And it's a meandering path. I'm like not that person who goes straight for my goal. I'll tell you that much. Right now, I do work at Coursera, and we basically offer all kinds of content and credentials to learners across the world. We have a consumer business, we have an enterprise business, we have a degrees business, and our whole goal is to make them really affordable. So really like affordable content and credentials to help people get job ready. And we have them from the best brands. So we have them from Google, Meta. I wish we had ones from Netflix, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And from the best universities, University of Michigan, Penn, pretty much across the world, in fact. Before that, I was at Netflix, and so I was on the product team at Netflix, covering kids in particular. And we really thought about in-product merchandising and sort of A/B testing to make the best experience, to make our originals and our non-originals sort of sing for everybody. And then before that, I was at Common Sense Media, and there I led our app, game, and website channels, and they were really rating and review systems. So we developed the system and rated and reviewed all kinds of media for parents, kids, and then eventually educators. And I built their digital citizenship curriculum. Then you asked what brought me here. Should I talk about that now, Rico?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I will say there's some people who know exactly what they want to do from when they're young or even when they're from when they're old, and I'm not that person. I never know. I almost don't know what I'm going to do next week. And so what I have to tell you is that I have a very organic bottoms up approach to finding my career. And even when people say the word career, like, what's your career? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what my career is with a capital C. I just don't think that way. I think in terms of like what interests me in the moment, and I move towards it. And it's usually something where I have to solve a problem and help people, whatever it is. So for Common Sense, I was attracted because I'm like, oh, parents really have no idea how to think about and decode media. And educators in school are like, oh my gosh, the internet. I mean, I'm old, right? It's like the internet and digital, sort of online digital lives. How do we help educate our kids? I'm like, that seems like a really interesting and new problem to solve. I feel that way very much at Coursera too, of like, okay, we have our higher education system. There are many things about it that are amazing, but it's not particularly affordable. And that's a downside for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So there I'm like, okay, is there a way that we can really help people who need an education, especially if they're more my age and are already in jobs and feel like stuck, like they want to change careers. So we really try. And so I think what attracted to me was that we got to help, like I'm getting to help people get jobs, get an education who would not able to in our current system in the United States of America or in the world, really. I think like the things that attract me usually are there's some bit of originality in the job, like, ooh, this is a new job, it's a pioneering job, we've never done this before. um, some flexibility, like, the structure of your job is changing and you get to change it. So I think that's really, really exciting. And I think just the ability to solve a problem that is really big. Like, I love it when you're interviewing for a job and they're like, we don't know what to do. We're trying to figure out how to do this big thing and we don't know how. We're going to need a new way to think about it because it automatically assumes that you're a risk taker. And I love that.
Yeah. Oh man, there was so much like I loved about that, and I want to dig in more if that's cool, because like that's a whole new way. I've heard a bottoms up approach in annual planning, but I've never heard someone say that they approach their career from a bottoms up approach, right? And you pointed out the things that you look for, which is great, but like for folks that are maybe lost and like maybe they're in their career in their role, they're like, is this the role for me, or I don't
Yes.
know what I want to do when I grow up, kind of thing.
Yes.
How would they approach it, this bottoms up approach? Can you walk us through what that means?
Yes.
'Cause I think we got a little bit of it, but yeah, I'd love to hear more.
It is a great question. Okay. So I think it does assume that you kind of know what you like or you know what you're passionate about. So what I might do is like make a spreadsheet, right? You take Google Sheets or whatever, and on in one column, like the left column, I might put all the things that I love. Well, I love helping people. I love this. I love that. Da, 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 down. And then you might actually take all of the experiences in your life, not just your jobs, but things that you've really enjoyed. Like, for example, I enjoyed volunteering for, a community center in high school. I might put that on the top. And then I might like, I enjoyed working at domestic violence shelter in college. I might put that there. Oh, I hated my first job, in theory I didn't, but like I didn't like that one. So I'm not going to put that there. And you put all the things that you love in your life. And it could be, I like taking out the garbage. Like I do not like taking out the garbage, for the record, Rico, but you
Mhm.
could put that in the Y axis, right? And then I feel like you could put an X then where things intersect, things that I love, and then jobs that I've had or things that I've done in my life where that's played out. And then you can start to see patterns when you put the X's in the boxes. And the patterns, I think, tell you they connect your passions with activities that you do. And okay, so then you can say, like, you then have almost like job requirements in there. So what comes out of there is like, okay, I must have a thing where I get to interact with many other people on a daily basis, or I want to sit in a cave and never see a person again. Like those are two extreme opposites. I'm the first, maybe obviously, but I have lots of people I know who are like, I really would rather not see another human being in my workplace ever again, like in person. I'm like, okay, but you know that about yourself. And then I think there's some people that I know, it's like, gosh, the closer I can be to revenue decisions, the better. And then there are other people who are like, if I have to even think about revenue and the man, like metrics of the man, I will just be so sad. And so I think that's really good to know about yourself. And then what you get from those X's is almost like job requirements somehow, things that you
Mhm.
must get in this next job or this next role. And then you kind of look for jobs that have those. And I know it's not that linear an approach, but I feel like you want to go from your heart, the things that like really move your heart and your mind, and go inside out in this approach. Now, there are many different ways to do it. That's one way. Another way is actually just like take many fields that you're interested in, right? Like you say, let's just pretend you're really good at data analysis. Okay, then you think of all the jobs that leverage data analysis and all the sectors, and you actually read a ton of job descriptions. You just go down them and you're like, I like this one. I don't like this one. No, that sounds awful. And you see that pattern emerge after you're looking at like hundreds, if not thousands of job descriptions. And that's another way to go bottoms up, is like, you don't know exactly what you want to do, but you know what your skills are, you know what your joy is, you know what you gravitate towards that, but you really see it in those job descriptions. So that's just two ideas.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Like there, if somebody is really lost, I think they could rewind that and listen, because that's the same thing when I work with some folks that are kind of feeling lost in their career. It's the sort of same thing that I walk them through. Like, what are the things? What is your personal narrative? What are the things that bring you joy? And not saying you have to just like do what like you're going to find joy in every single moment of this job. But what are the things that find you joy? What are the values? Like, what are your must-haves? What are your deal breakers? Right. And
Yes.
when you start to put those things down on paper, even though in your head you may know it, it starts to materialize and manifest in a way that, like, oh, I actually like education and
Yeah.
like things like for you. And they education might not have been on the top of your list, but all the other pieces that make up the role happen to fit everything on your list. So
Yes.
that's amazing. And how has that been so far in guiding you through your journey?
Well, okay, I make it seem as if I use this like really analytical approach, and really I kind of do, right? Because I wouldn't, those things kind of have to be in place. But then when you're looking for the specific job, I think so much is about, like, I hate to say it, but serendipity, just like, the universe, elements of the universe colliding, I would say, in a great way. And also people or people you're willing to reach out to. So I do think that when I think about how I've gotten my jobs, it's usually I did have like a connection or a connection to that place or person. Although that did not happen at Netflix, that was like a cold LinkedIn. Um, but I feel like that's often sort of the igniter is knowing someone um, at that place, and just like that time in your life is probably a time when internally it's time to move on for whatever reason. So it has to be timed with when you're ready, and when you're ready, and
Yeah.
when you're not ready.
Yeah. Um, Going to talk a little bit more about what you do. So, what do you do in content? Because even what you did, yeah, I mean, common sense, yeah, and Netflix too. You're helping us curate the right types of stuff to put in front of the right people, right?
Mhm.
So, what is it about content strategy? Maybe you give a little bit of background on what it is, because I think content strategy in a marketing context is way different than content strategy that you're doing. So, could you
Yes.
give a little bit of context on what it is that you do, and then what about that um, brings you joy or interests you or keeps you in that space?
Yes. Okay. So it is true that a lot of content strategists sit on marketing teams. That is one flavor or kind of content strategy. I somehow have avoided most of that in the definition of what I do. I don't know why or how, but it must be what I gravitate towards more. At the three different places where I've really been substantially, I would say it was very different. So at Common Sense Media, um, it was very much about taking an editorial stance on sort of the dissection of media. So we literally had to create a rating and review system for children's media. And it had to be really evidence based. It had to have like experts weigh in on the sort of the framework. And it had to give the right useful information to parents about what was in media, what was positive about media, what media would enrich their kids' lives in different ways. And so I feel like that was one definition. Now they're all kind of spin-offs. It was really cool because we got to package that into top lists, top 10 lists of blah, 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 apps. Um, we got to package it into these guides. Like I remember we had like a guide for students or learners with learning differences. That was really, really, really an amazing
Mm.
project, but that was a packaging kind of role. Um, I think and then we created educational curricula. So like building of a K through 12 curriculum that focused on digital citizenship. That was like a whole other sort of version of content strategy. Rico, do you hear any feedback right now?
No, everything sounds good on my
Oh,
side.
good. I hear it on my end a little bit. I don't know why, but I'm going to try and ignore it.
Okay.
Um, um, okay, so the next role was Netflix, and that was very much about really trying to, yes, put together a catalog of sort of curated content for kids that was ages, well, we said 0 to 12, but really in my mind it was always age 2 to 12 because of all of the guidelines about when kids should watch TV. Um, but that was very much about like understanding kids' like psyches and minds. We did all kinds of qualitative research around the world, really, to understand how kids categorize content, to understand how they like get signals from what a piece of content means to them. So, for a great example, actually, is that so much of what we did was like synopses and words, like you know about you would know about a movie or TV show, certainly based on the video. Hats off to you, Rico. The trailers, and then also the images. That was like huge piece of information. But of course, the synopsis, like what was the description, or were there like 3 words that described what that piece of content was? For kids, they can't read. And so the image meant so much more for them, and the video meant so much more for them and for their parents too, quite honestly. So a lot of it was trying to understand how kids categorize and interpret the signals you're sending through your UI and through the box art and through the synopsis and through everything. I would say that was content strategy in a very small nutshell at Netflix. And then at Coursera, it's different yet. I almost wasn't ready for it. Here it's like a lot. But I would say content strategy at Coursera is really trying to understand the on-platform data signals and the off-platform like landscape and market research to figure out what kind of content we want to put onto Coursera. So this is about building a catalog of courses and degrees and certificates that really add up to an offering that'll be appealing to learners, and putting them in a frame, whether that frame is like a trajectory through skill development or mastery, acquisition, or like a packaging. So right now we've launched like a generative AI academy, for example, and we had to really come up with a framework for how that academy would be structured, the content that would go in, the messaging that went along with it, and then the go-to-market strategy. So I think a lot of it is like, identification of content, dissection of content, packaging of content, and then working with design, product, video, all of your groups, like, your creative groups, to really make it come alive in the product.
Nice. That description of what you do at Coursera sounds super huge.
Yeah.
And I could see how it could be a surprise. So thank you for running through that, because you gave like 3 almost distinct examples of like how content strategy kind of manifests at a business, right?
Yeah.
And I think people would be interested in like seeing that's how some content strategy teams operate.
Yeah.
The next question I have for you is like, if somebody wanted to get into this, what should they do? But then also kind of to piggyback on that, what do you look for in content strategists to join your team or to build these kinds of programs?
Yes. So it would have been very different for each of those jobs. So I feel like in a way, adaptability and flexibility might be a really, really strong skill to have in content strategy. I would say a love for the content itself is really key. So at Netflix, like I don't love all movies and TV shows, but I love some movies and TV shows like a lot. Meaning like with an obsession that is almost embarrassing, for example. And so you have to like really love the content itself, I believe, to do great content strategy. At Common Sense, that curriculum, like I'm like, oh my gosh, I think kids really need this, and like they will benefit so much from it. So I believed in that. And at Coursera, do I believe that people need affordable, high quality certificates, degrees, and courses from the best institutions? I do. So you have to believe, first of all. Then I think I do think being data minded is actually really important in these jobs, even though it says content. I think data is such a big part of all companies, but if you have a catalog, it's really looking across factors in the catalog. So it's like, for example, at Netflix, it was like, what genre or category is it in? For kids, is this about a dog? Is it about a cat? Is it about bravery? Is it about like girl power? Like all these themes are really important. There's a correlate at Coursera. Is it, first of all, is it a certificate, a degree, or a course? Is it about data science? Is it about business? Is it about health? Is it about psychology? Like the topics and the topical sort of framing is really, really important at Coursera. But there are other factors that are so key, like, is it free or not? Is it included in the subscription? Is it packaged with anything else? How are we merchandising these things? I think that's the next level. It's not just what the piece of content, but what's the frame is it in? What is the frame that it's in? Um, and I think then, and how do you present it to the world? So it's sort of like making these data driven and curatorial choices to put together this content mix and this portfolio,
Hmm.
and then working with your I would say partner teams across the org. That's, consumer insights and creative and design and product and engineering, to make sure that they actually are like resonating with learners as you hope they will, and changing your mind, because what you hope is not always what people do. So then monitoring how people actually interact. For us, it's like looking at revenue and looking at enrollments, and at Netflix it was watch hours and retention, and like those key metrics are key. So I was a little meandering, but I hope I sort of answered your question, Rico.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's if people are looking, it's good because you're giving an in-depth look of what like content strategy looks like for you, and it almost like when you're talking about Coursera, it's like all the teams that were on creative production or whatever version of that org it mixed into one almost,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because you're
Yeah.
doing a little bit of product marketing, you're doing a little bit of merchandising, you do a little bit of tech, you're doing a little bit of all these things.
Yes.
um which that's a big job to roll up, because we had individual teams do this.
Yes.
Now it sounds like you and your team are tasked with doing this kind of
More
thing.
so. And honestly, I think the thing that I'm trying to get better at every day is actually then the capital S strategy. How do you tie this together and explain it to people at the company, and make sure that the scope is big enough, that you're covering enough of the market, that it's small enough and narrow enough that you're solving a very clear problem, and that you're covering it in a very unique and differentiated way from your competitors.
I We could probably have another
I
conversation
know.
about how to do
I
um,
know.
that,
Let's
but
save
that's
it.
like another
Save it for
hour.
another time, Rico.
We'll save that for another time, because I think that would be a good topic to cover at some point, like how to have these strategic conversations, right? Because this is creative leadership with heart. So like part of it is, you know, how to inspire people and things like that, but it's also how do you communicate these things to people who maybe don't understand the same kind of language that we're using, right? Who maybe
Yeah.
talk in ROI and KPIs as
Yes.
opposed to what's the right thing to do, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's a whole nother conversation. Let's save that one.
Yeah, that sounds good.
'Cause this is part one. Probably that'll be a part two.
He's like,
um,
"Don't meander on me, Shira."
no, 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 no. It's good. And then okay, so now I'm assuming now because I don't know your team that well. If you have a team, because you and Netflix, you were more an organizer of like cross functional. So like no
Yeah.
one reported to you, but everyone looked to you to like get all of our stuff together,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So for you now leading people, like, what's the best part of it, and what's the biggest challenge of the team that you're leading today?
Ah, yes. Okay, so I will say this, interestingly, before Netflix, I managed a team of, like, 50 people, if you count
Oh wow,
contractors too.
yeah,
That was before Netflix, and I would say the reason I talk about it is because it's the first management job is that is the hardest, because you have no concept of how hard it is at all. I think my biggest mistake, honestly, is that I really was like, okay, I'm gonna talk to this person about every single task. So they do something, and then we debrief, and then there's something else. And it was like this iterative process. And I'm like, this is not efficient at all. So during many years at Common Sense, I actually learned to really think about the role. Like, if this role were to do three capabilities, what would they be? X, Y, and Z. And make sure we have like really clarity on like, that's like the scope of your role encompasses these three important capabilities. Okay, given that, in the next year or even the next quarter, what are the three things that we want to do and that your role will do? And really, I mean, it's usually the person who defines them, honestly, but to have that conversation about like the three biggest things, places that you can make an impact, and then they can do the project plan, they can do the planning, they can do the sort of more of the detail work that really carries it out in the execution. But if you don't have that frame, it is an absolute mess. And I feel like I almost drove one of my interns to drink. I mean, she's probably already drinking, let's be honest, but like I feel like I almost drove her to drink because it was like so many check-ins like every day. And I'm like, I don't think this is the way to manage. But I learned that really quick. And then at Coursera, oh my gosh, I would say when I got there, the team was very small. I think it was about 3 people. Morale was absolutely down. They'd been without a leader for 2 years,
Mhm.
and there was no mission, no charter, no directive, no idea of what they did. I think, I mean, I Coursera is amazing, but I think there had been a gap in leadership, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, you
so,
were there. They brought you in for a reason.
yes, exactly. And so, I think we took a like, I don't know if scorched earth is the right term here, but we took a like, okay, let's just
You burned
erase.
it down and
Yeah, let's
rebuilt it.
burn it down and rebuild. Exactly. We will be the phoenix rising. So we, let's see, what did we do? I first interviewed, like, I would say 50 people at the company to understand what they thought my team did. But, oh my gosh, no one had any
50
clue.
different answers. 50
Like,
to 50 people with 50 different answers,
yes,
I'm guessing.
exactly. There are different answers. They had no answer. Like, I don't know who what that team is, right? And I don't mean to laugh. It's awful, but it's true. And I'm like, okay. And then the team we worked most closely with, basically they're like, oh, you're there to like answer our questions. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I'm like, let's build a charter from the ground up and a mission. And so over 6 months, we really worked together and we tried to understand what the biggest business problems were at the company and how we could help solve them. That was it. Biggest business problems, how do we solve them? So first we had to figure out what the biggest business problems are. And luckily our company is very organized. So I feel like all these were like on a sheet for us to look at. And we really mapped out how we could make a difference. And that meant knowing who we were not, what we could do, what we couldn't do, what resource we have. I think over the course of a few years, my team got up to 20 people. And I think, part of the reason for it was that we we started from being very reactive to requests and consultations, and we started saying, no, this is what we do. And today we actually, I mean, literally today from 12 to 2 p.m. today, we ran a session that aligned our whole org and marketing and product and the GMs for our segments. We did an alignment session. We've done 4 of them this week, and it really is, you want to say, it's the goal of them was to say, this is our company content strategy. Do you agree or do you not agree? What do you not agree with? What do you agree with? And like, we put it out there, and it was really exciting. And still I'm like, oh, we could have done this, and we should have had more market research, and we should have done this, and da 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 da. But really, to go from where we were to where we are is so thrilling. So I think it's been just an absolute thrill to work with the team. I mean, I feel like we did it together. Like, people have not really left either, on the team. I mean, some people have for various reasons, but like, we're a very cohesive team. We kind of operate as a unit. Like we did on our recent sort of company culture scores, ours were so high. I was elated.
That is such an amazing story, and like there's so much that I want to dig into because there some people I've heard like, oh, mission vision charter, like you don't need to have that. Like we have a company one and that's enough. And I'm like, that's not enough because you're not connecting what you do to the business. And if you can't connect what your team does for the business, one, that's bad for them because how do they feel inspired and motivated, and then like what how important do they feel? And
Yes.
two, who's gonna come along and say, like, what does your team do? Why do we need you? Like what
I
can
know.
you explain, like, right? So like there's so many reasons why where people think, this is not a big deal, we'll work on it later. But to your
Yeah.
point, it was like foundational to like actually what is it that we're building? Because you come here to lead a team. I don't know what this team does. They don't know what they do. So what did you hire me to lead? Like
Yes.
this kind of like super ambiguous, like question answering group of people because that's not what we are,
I know.
right? So I
Yeah.
mean, like that's amazing. Like people who don't believe it's important should listen to that part again on like what you were able to do in a 6 month span of time, and that like the churn rate is proof, and the fact that you gathered all the entire business and gave your perspective on what the content strategy is, or even maybe just the plan for your content strategy. You weren't told what to do. You're actually saying like, we are a team. This is what we do. This is what we're doing for the business. That's fantastic.
Thanks, Rico.
um,
I
yeah,
mean,
you're excited. I'm excited for you, and I wasn't there.
well, we know each other too, so there's like more connection, reason to be excited.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, okay, so that's great. And that I think is the challenge and maybe the win that you've had. And so I want to get into now advice for folks. You've given a lot already, but if somebody wanted to get into content strategy or get into this business,
Mhm.
what piece of advice would you give?
I would think long and hard and make sure you like content. Right? Like meaning I'm like not a product person. I don't want to be PM. I think a lot of my peers are like, "Oh, I would love to be PM." I'm like, "No, no, no." I'm like my skill set, my joy does not reside there. So take a good hard look and make sure the thing that you think you want to do is a thing you actually want to do in your mind and your heart. Make sure it's a match for you. And then I would say, look, I mean, people do this to me all the time, but like, if you know people who are in the profession or if you see them on LinkedIn, write to them. And some people are embarrassed to write to other people that they don't know. I get it, but do it. I mean, I take random calls all the time and I realize I'm like probably people say, "Oh, you're too nice." I don't think of it that way, but I do think some people have different tolerances for taking a cold call or a sort of a random LinkedIn. I have a high tolerance, especially if someone's like, "Oh, I would really love to know more because," and they have a reason. Um, do not hesitate to do that. I think like the more insight you can get into a job, the better. So I think even interviewing people about their jobs and saying I from what I can tell, I just respect the job that you're in and the trajectory that you have. I would just love to hear more about it. And I'm not even calling to ask you for a job. People are very flattered. And in those situations, especially, they can be very generous. So I would say gather information from a variety of sources. Um, that's one thing. And then I think there's like a
Yeah.
mentality, just like don't be scared. Put yourself out there. I know it's so cliched, but you have it's like internet dating, the more leads you get, the more you try, the more likely it is that you'll find your dream partner or your dream job. But if you don't even like go on a date at all, you literally cannot get married.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I use this acronym for fear. It's false expectations appearing real, right? So we're afraid because of stories we're telling ourselves or of things that haven't happened yet, but in our minds have already happened, right? So we
Yeah.
start to say, I'm not going to make that call because they're not going to, who am I for them to take my call? They're the head of content strategy at Coursera. Like, of course not going to talk to me, right? But we don't know that. We're just making that story up in our head
Yes.
because when it's safer, it protects us, right? It
Yes.
protects us
Yes.
from rejection, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and it's the easier, more comfortable path, right? Those are usually when if someone's going to choose comfort or courage, 90% of people will choose comfort just because it's easy, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, like the LinkedIn piece is, and I think you feel the same way. Say I feel the same way too. Like reach out to us because people helped us along the way. We none of us are achieved anything in life on our own, right? So whether they knew it or not, there were mentors out there that helped us, that did something, that said something, either that helped us or even maybe gave us a perspective like I don't ever want to be like that person, right?
Yes.
But everybody taught us something. And
Yeah.
so it's just our way of paying it forward and like helping other people. That's why I do this. Like I don't nobody pays me to do this podcast.
Yes.
It's because I want to help people. We want to pay it forward, right?
Yes. That's right.
Um, and in that same vein, maybe there's someone out there and maybe there's someone isn't, but who was out there influenced you in your career that either as a mentor, a coach, and a model
Yes.
or whatever?
Yes. I'll say a little bit about a few different people because it's so
Sure.
hard to think of one person. It's like when people say, "Oh, what's your favorite movie?" I'm like, "Oh, I have a variety of them, but for different reasons." Okay, so a piano teacher probably when I was young, she is the kind of person who's like, "Do not practice the easy parts. You go to the hard part and you practice the transition between the easy part and the hard part." I think that was really golden advice. My cello teacher at the same time, she said, you should always picture yourself on a stage at Carnegie Hall. You sit in any room, you go to any event, you are in a recital for cello, you pretend you're on a stage at Carnegie Hall and you deserve to be there. So I thought that was really good advice too. Different leaders throughout my career, let's say, oh, one was very interested in like rigor and sort of frameworks and making things defensible. That's important, the rigor and like the showing the data behind. At Netflix, I feel like many people taught me, you speak up, you disagree. If you don't agree with something, you can say it out loud. It doesn't matter where you are in a hierarchy, you say it. And at Coursera, I think one leader really taught me to be concise, which is not evident in this particular interview. And the other person, I think, really taught me about strategy with a capital S and the story that you must tell to inspire people to that strategy, but to have like the actual evidence behind it too. So it's not just lip service. And then, of course, mom and dad, I mean, like my first job, he's like, you're going to negotiate, right? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm so happy with $30,000 a year, in Chicago, Illinois in 2020. I was like, that was like a lot of money to me. He's like, you will negotiate. Do you know that women don't negotiate? You need to negotiate. So I feel like he always pushed me. You push, push, push. Even if you're scared, you do it. And then my mom, I mean, she's a role model, right? She's been a leader. She's the head of school for 50 years. I took her for granted 100%. I saw her as mom. I didn't think of her as a professional. It is not now until I'm like, 45 years old that I'm like, oh my gosh, mom was a baller and mom is a baller. And I had no idea. So I think like her whole being was like an absolute role model, but I took it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That last thing, taking things for granted, right? Like it's hard because in the moment, but like I'm sure in the moment, all of these folks that impacted your life, you weren't like, that's great advice. You're probably like, what do you mean practice the hard part? I don't want to practice that, right? But
Yes,
it's like you build callus. Like as you practice a hard part, starts to become easier. It starts to become
exactly.
easier, and now you're not afraid of challenge, right?
Yes.
And those all things are great things, lessons to learn along the way. Um, and unfortunately, that we're coming up at time. So what are you up? How can people get a hold of you? You said you take calls? I take calls. If you are willing to share, you can. You don't have to. But if people want to get a hold of you and they want to
Yes.
find you, one, are
Yes.
you open? And two, how will they do it?
Okay, so you have my LinkedIn, I think Shira Katz at Coursera. That'll be easy. My email address is shikatz at gmail.com, shikatz@gmail.com. I think that's a good way.
Yeah, yeah, or LinkedIn, right? If
Yeah.
it's a little like,
Rico was like, I can't believe you just gave that out, Shira. Was
yeah,
that
it's
was that
okay.
was that bad?
No, my email address is out in the ether. And I invite anyone who has questions to use it. And if Shira, sounds like you like the pay it forward mentality also to
Yeah,
help others. Yeah.
definitely. Sometimes a little spacey and a little like disorganized, so just also take that into account if you write me.
No, I've known you long enough. I get your Shira-isms, and maybe I'm the only one who
Rico's
uses
like,
that.
oh yeah, I know that, Shira.
But there's always gold in there, right? So, well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk and chat with us. I know you're super busy. We were talking about it before, and we're doing this on a Friday. This won't be posted on a Friday, but we were doing this on a Friday afternoon. So, thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Thanks so much, Rico. You're very sweet always. And I always love working with you. And you're a great interviewer.
Well, thank you so much. All right, we're gonna call it a wrap today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Shira.
Bye.
Thank you for checking out Creative Leadership with Heart. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. We have a lot more content coming out. So if you do subscribe, you'll get notified when we have new episodes. All right, take it easy. See you in the next one.